The last 20 years have been a nightmare for Maria Lopatina, a resident of the Ukrainian capital Kiev. Both she and her entire family have had to fight diseases, one after another. And then, just a short time ago, another massive blow.
My daughter finished her first year of studies and had to leave the university. Her health deteriorated. Neurosurgeons examined her and said she had a brain tumor, an inoperable one. They said it's unclear how long she will live.
Maria is among tens of thousands of evacuees from the Chernobyl area who now inhabit this suburb in Kiev. And for her, like most of the forced settlers here, that date, 22 years ago, still feels like yesterday. It was one fateful mistake that led to history's biggest man-made disaster. On April the 26th, 1986, workers at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, some 100 kilometers from Kiev, incorrectly performed the technical experiment. The reactor, which carried almost 200 tons of radioactive fuel, exploded.
After the explosion, all the reactive materials were emitted from the reactor up to 6 kilometers above ground. Then came the northeastern wind, which carried it towards Poland, Belarus, Sweden, and this concerned the whole of Europe.
The immediate death toll was just 28 people. But more than 50,000 who lived in a nearby city of Pripyat were exposed to strong doses of radiation. In the 36 hours, they were forced to wait for the evacuation. The long-term effect on their health and consequences of radioactive contamination still remain unclear. It is believed that tens of thousands of cancer cases across the former USSR and Europe came as a result of the Chernobyl blast. Not only did the disaster impact on human health, but also the political system. The Soviet authorities had been concealing the tragedy from their own people and the rest of the world. That, as many still believe, was the final straw that broke the Soviet Union's back. Dr. Hans Blix, who was the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency at the time and the first Westerner to visit the disaster site, explains.
The drawback of that was, of course, that people here in Russia, they did not believe the authorities any longer. And they know that things happen, and authorities deny it. Then you lose credibility.
A metal shelter over the reactor, called the sarcophagus, was built less than a year after the fallout to prevent radiation from spreading. But more than 2 decades on, a 30-kilometer area around the plant remains a dead zone. In some places, radiation levels are still very high. Renewed hope to deal with the danger came with a plan to build a new containment structure for the plant, the so-called ARC, which will cover the whole building. The French company Novarco invested 1 billion euros into the project, which is destined to remove the radioactive threat for at least 100 years and possibly allow the plant to be completely dismantled.
The existing shelter is reported to be having a leak, and just 100 meters away from the site, the meter shows at least 10 times more than normal human level.
The present sarcophagus was strengthened recently by a Russian-Ukrainian company, but experts say this would not save the day.
The lifetime for the structures which were installed in '86 was determined not more than 30 years. The shelter, initially it was not a sealed structure, and nowadays it is also not sealed.
Despite the efforts to contain nuclear contamination, it seems clear that this land will never be inhabited again. While the fallout period of radioactive cesium and transuranium particles is 30 to 50 years, traces of plutonium will take up to 24,000 years to disperse. But this is little concern to Maria Lopatina. Her mind is set on how to survive with less than $100 worth of monthly pension with all of her diseases. And she understands, just like that of the exclusion zones, her life will never return to normal. Alexei Yaroshevsky, Russia Today, Kiev and Chernobyl.